Welcome to the Solution Architect Show. Today, I'm very excited to welcome Bernard Seeto, an experienced business technology leader with a career spanning strategy, enterprise architecture, and digital transformation across both Australia and New Zealand. Welcome, Bernard.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you. Before we start the show, I just want to acknowledge that I probably haven't told you, you are probably one of the biggest influence on actually for me to choose architecture as my career path. Because back then I was working as a SharePoint developer, and you probably wouldn't remember, but I'm a bit advocate for SharePoint. So I think I try to pitch you around doing some big project into SharePoint. And then you kindly took me into a meeting. I still remember with a Gartner analyst. And in that meeting, I can't remember that person's name, but basically he declared SharePoint development is dead. SharePoint as platform isn't, but SharePoint development is dead. And over the past probably 12 or 15 years, I think his prediction is right. I think around that time, one of the reasons I choose that one is SharePoint is dead. I need to pivot to learn something new. The second reason is, this architecture thing or the architect can predict future in some way. And that sort of pushed me into seriously considering working as a solution architect to begin my architecture journey. So just segue to your career. So I've been talking a bit more than I normally would do. So maybe do you want to introduce yourself and then tell us how you start your career and why you actually choose architecture as one of your major career journey?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And yeah, I do remember that meeting. I think it was a bit of a watershed meeting for you at that point in time. But coming back on topic, my journey started as a developer. Yeah. And the challenge I always had was that as a developer, originally in 3GL, and then moving to VB2 and 3 and those areas and client server and changes in the architecture of different systems from 2-tier to 3-tier, and to some extent you could say cloud is 2-tier based architectures, that the technology is moving so fast, and that even then you had to think about how do you structure this information. Yeah, because essentially we're moving data from A to B, and that the role of architecture, to your point, is to take into account foresight, give it longevity to create value in the future, the form and shape of the technology, predominantly through the non-functionals drive a lot of the shape and form, function, what functionality do we need for our business and predominantly that's fit for purpose, and more financials are becoming an important component. And for me, I was always drawn towards what's the right design and whether it's been designed correctly or right. And therein lies some really important roles for architecture, which is around helping to make the big decisions on technology. And it is also becoming more and more of an insurance policy for organizations as the technology evolves. So that's a bit of my philosophy on it and where I've derived a lot of my thinking. And my journey, as I said, started out as a developer, management consulting as well, a bit of client relationship in the organizations. And then after a while, I had a really good understanding of context of a business and the relationships. And that's what started hitting me into the journey of architecture by having the developer background, becoming more face-to-face with clients, understanding process, understanding the business model that they're moving towards. Architecture became the next logical path for me and helping to provide, for a better word for it, an ambition and scale that you were able to decompose and codify for other people to execute on. And the other factor is I wasn't exactly a great developer. While I could do it, the point is there are people better at it than me, but what I could give them was a better context so that they could choose a course of action. Does that give you enough of a summary?
Yes, definitely. I think what I can just try to summarize what you just mentioned, that you mentioned you started as a developer and you mentioned about, I'm sure you're a good developer, so you're probably just humble in that way. And then you're moving on in when you say about contact is more, you started working more in the business side to actually really understand how the business run. I think in one of the session I had with you when I started as an enterprise architect, you asked me, the first question you asked me is how that company I work for make money. So that really get me thinking. I never thought about that way. My sort of technical brain always taught me around, okay, what are the next tech I can bring on rather than think the other way, which is how business are running, why the company exists and how they make money. And that context you mentioned is, I think, is crucial for, I guess, not only for architect, basically for anybody who want to have a good career in IT, you really need to be able to understand like the company you work for, why they exist and how they make money. I think that's a golden nugget I got. I always got a lot of golden nugget by talking to you. That's why I want to bring you on the show. I guess moving on, so you mentioned about the sort of your career background and you try to transition into that architecture. I think, can you talk about like when you started on the architecture position, how you actually upskill yourself, try to be a great architect in your career?
I think the real challenge with architecture as a whole and technology, it's always moving at a particular pace. Yeah.
Yeah,
And that because it is, it's very hard to be on top of all of it. Yeah.
yeah,
But what you want to try and understand, the way I look at it, is where, what particular technologies are starting to get picked up. Yeah. And typically, I would read, and people will have a bit of a poo on this, but I try and read some of the McKinsey articles because if McKinsey is saying a particular technology is being adopted, that tells you it's moved from that first immersive, emerging creative area, starting to get wider adoption. And for me, that was one of the areas that I could see a combination of how the technology was being applied. Yeah. I'm not keen on technology for technology's sake. I'm keen for the technology to be applied. Yeah. And then the next area, of course, is when will that technology start to move to become commoditized? Yeah. Because if it becomes commoditized, it's going to become freely available, that there is going to be a lot of competition in terms of the people that are commoditizing. If you look at cloud is a really good example of that. Sooner or later will rationalize, but therefore you know that you've got to make certain bets on those areas. And for me, it's looking at things like McKinsey to keep me up to speed with application. But then, of course, you've got areas of Gartner that gives you view on the, what do they call it? The hype curve on different technologies that allows you to keep speed with that. But then also more and more there are forums like InfoQ that help me to stay abreast of those areas. And of course, now with ChatGPT and Copilot, I can ask it to help me write some of that code to see what it looks like or to test it. But more and more, the role of the architect to keep abreast of that, it takes a lot of work, and it's not one person, it is a team because you actually need to work with all your engineers and architects and the ideas and what they see and do to be able to stay abreast as to what is possible.
yeah, I definitely really like the saying that you have is tech for tech's sake. It's definitely not a way to go because I think in my previous role I was asked to bring some AI flavor in the project I do, and that's definitely not the best way to add value to business. And if you look at a lot of the research paper around a lot of the AI pilot fail, my guess is there are probably a lot of them is doing AI for the sake of doing AI rather than we have a business problem to solve and happen AI is the best way to solve that problem to add value to the business. Yeah. And so you mentioned about some of the like the information source that you normally go to, like McKinsey and Gartner. You also mentioned about the ChatGPT and the AI. I guess my next question would be, how do you know they are a valid information? Like, I guess if you look at McKinsey and Gartner, they get a bit of, in some regard, you can almost trust them. But with AI, like when you actually ask for a information, how do you know they are for real? And what sort of technique you use to make sure the output you get are not like a fake news in that sense?
I think your question also applies to McKinsey and Gartner as well. Yeah. I don't think it's just solely what comes from ChatGPT. You got to verify, you got to ask multiple sources. I think the best way to really test it is by doing a spike. But that's why you want to get some clever heads together and have a hypothesis of what you want to test of that particular technology so that you can identify what works and what doesn't work. While it's easy to say, and it's always tricky when you're getting pressure, but it takes a bit of skill to be able to work through these areas and understand the implications of certain technologies and know what the longevity of some of it is, as opposed to just jumping towards the next shiny area. You got to think about the fact that once you put technology in, very hard to get rid of it. And we often talk about technology debt, where people have decided to take shortcuts, but probably another way to express technical debt is the organization has chosen to risk accept a particular path, and that path may be multiple solutions that do the same thing, and therefore you're prepared to pay more than once for the same functionality, but you're also prepared to secure in the event of vulnerabilities. You're also prepared to make sure that you can double down on fixing it twice type area in terms of vulnerability and patching. There are so many other factors in terms of the maintenance that you're prepared to do. Yeah.
Cool. I'll going to move on from this topic. The next one is for people who want to break into architecture. I got asked a lot on that question, and that's one of the reasons I'm doing this solution architecture. I just want your view on this. If a developer want to break into architecture, what's your advice for them?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. Yeah. Because what you're really asking is you're asking an individual contributor to think rather broadly. Yeah. And the word enterprise architecture or architecture function in itself, the word enterprise implies it looks across the whole organization and takes into account both business and technology. Yeah. So if you're prepared to understand the business, understand the role that technology has in enabling a business, understanding the business model, then there is an opportunity for you. It's not easy because you're trying to balance a lot of things in your head, because you remember most businesses are divided by division or function, whereas the enterprise architecture function typically sits in IT, but in reality, it straddles both business and technology at the same time. Yeah,
Yeah.
and the key problem that you want to make sure that you don't get into is enterprise architecture as an ivory tower. You really need able to appreciate and anticipate where our business may go, but also work with people that are prepared to have the greater detail and appreciate what they're offering in terms of the execution of that architecture. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great advice. I guess putting on the other angle, this is probably a question for me. I have been in architecture, mainly solution architecture. I did in my last job, I did about 18 months enterprise architecture. So I guess what's next for people who've been doing architecture maybe for a while? And what's next challenge we can take on?
Yeah. If you look at enterprise architecture, you're here to help the organization make the big, broad decisions. Yeah. And how your organization will transition over time to support the business model. yeah, and operating model they choose to have. Where to next for architecture? If you look at the advent of AI, ChatGPT, etc., more and more business colleagues are becoming citizen developers.
Yes.
That the architecting is not purely the domain or the development of solutions and technical designs are the domain of the technology function. It is starting to move beyond that. And if you look at what's facing the citizen developers, they've ironically they are playing in production with production data. There is the fact that generative AI prompting is a form of coding and that English is the new coding language. The scope of architecture has just, for a better word for it, might have doubled overnight. And the CIO has suddenly got a whole bunch of new developers available in the organization that may or may not want to have the structure of architecture. Yeah. So that's one area. I think the other area is that as more and more business models evolve, be it, say, for example, fintechs versus the more traditional credit union type organizations, it becomes more and more important that you understand how that business model is going to evolve. And it's going to evolve a lot quicker based on the capability of the technology as well. That's another avenue to look at. And then probably the final one is instead of enterprise architects, you have ecosystem architects that are looking at how your organization fits into the broader ecosystem and the role that you play in understanding that interaction. That if you're, for example, a B2B company, you're actually in the middle of the ecosystem or the middleman or the middle person to which you've got to look on the left and the right and making sure that you're got the appropriate architecture that maintains your capability for your business, but also maintains your value.
Yeah, yeah, that's great answer on that. And definitely there's probably a lot of that business acumen or what you said at the context I need to learn in order to become a great enterprise architect. That's how I see it. Yeah, so I guess we touch on quite a few points on the AI and architecture, but I'm going to ask that question again. How do you see AI changing the of the enterprise architect, and how are you adapting in your workplace?
Yeah, so AI now is in every part of the stack when you look at it, and it can either be used for productivity purposes and efficiency purposes. And more, because of that, you're starting to, you need to understand, particularly if it's used in business processes for automation, such as through agentic AI, you really need to understand the business capability, the business process, and how, for a better word for it, you can design so that no human is overly involved or getting the right balance. Yeah.
Yeah.
And dare I say it, what is it? The digital autonomous organization. I know it's been talked about previously. It may come up more and more as a possibility to, for a better word for it, do all the routine activities, allowing humans to focus on more the creative areas. So it becomes, from an architecture perspective, how do you better understand business capability? So people, process, and tech combined, because to some extent you now have an AI tool that can cover more of the people and the process and the tech aspects than previously.
Yeah, that's a great insight on that. And also, my take is on that is there's also a big question mark around how AI going to lead us. Yeah, that'll be going to be very interesting and also exciting in the coming years. Where I think all company now moving from the pilot to actually utilize AI in the workplace, and that will be quite interesting, see what sort of changes so they'll have. I think we are almost at the end of the recording. Do you have anything to add or any question that I should ask? I haven't.
I think you've been pretty thorough with your questioning. It's pretty hard to always predict the future, but I'll leave you with a bit of a joke about architects. And architects know 100 ways to make love, but no one to make love to. So I think everybody wants to be an architect and everybody wants to make love to everyone. But the point is, you can't do that all at the same time. So, from an architect's perspective, you're going to have to use your judgment pretty well. And that's what you're really there to do, to help provide the navigation and the direction for an organization, to find that person that you end up loving. And hopefully, you have a great partnership and you go for quite a long time. But what's really important in architecture is that judgment and navigation that you provide the organization so that you have a long-lasting relation between business and tech that contributes to a valuable future.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Bernard, joining us. And thanks, everyone, tuning in. And if you working either as enterprise architect or solution architect and want to share your story, and you can just drop us a direct message on LinkedIn. Thanks for tuning in today.